Composers don't listen to music like other people. I used to think that they knew some super secret composer theory that the rest of us were not privy to, but it turns out it's more simple than that. Composers have this unique ability to zoom out and see the bigger picture, to hear patterns that might not be obvious to everyone else on a first listen. They can take simple concepts and transform them into something that seems magical, but it's not magic. And there are some techniques and things to listen for that I'm going to show you today that I think will help you start to see some of these things as well. Maybe see the forest instead of getting distracted by all those darn trees. I know when I'm writing something, I'm usually this close to it, and that ability to zoom out is something that has been really helpful for me over the years once I learned what to listen for and how to do it to my own work. We can learn a lot of the building blocks of composition simply by observing how other composers treat melodies. Even if you're not interested in writing traditional melodies in your own music, don't skip this, because learning how a great melody works and why it works will teach you some of the most fundamental skills in all of music, like pattern recognition, tension and release, phrase shaping, structure, gesture, pacing. If you can write a compelling melody, or at least understand how it works, you can write almost anything. Great melodies are conversational. They use pattern and contrast to create a musical dialogue, and the best ones have a musical shape. They don't just center around the same few notes, they take the listener on a journey. And I think one of the most fascinating things to observe when you're listening to melodies is how they move and when they move. The most effective ones use some element of restraint, and they save motion for very intentional purposes, to draw attention to very intentional things. They might use leaps, like larger intervals, to do the same, to draw attention to very specific things. And how would you do that? Well, you save your leaps for that place that you want to be emphasized. Or vice versa. If your melody is all leaps, then suddenly stepwise motion becomes the differentiator. And that's the thing that draws our attention. Our ears are very sensitive to something that's different from everything else that we've set up to that point. So you can create this sense of pattern and then contrast through using strategic repetition. And that's something that a lot of composers are really scared of, because in today's DAW culture, we can often get stuck in a loop. But if we use repetition intentionally, like a great melody does, it can be incredibly effective. When Ramin composed the themes for Game of Thrones, he created one for nearly every major character, for every house, for every faction. And towards the end of the series, he started blending those themes together, depending on how those elements interacted with each other in the story. At the beginning of the series, at the beginning of season 1, I don't think he had any idea exactly how all of these characters would end up interacting with each other towards the end of the series. How could he? But he understood something from the beginning that was very important and made everything come together wonderfully at the end. He had to make each theme, each melody, each gesture that served as a theme for whatever character or house distinct and independent from the others that he had created. So that then by the end of the show, he could fit these things together like jigsaw puzzles because of the negative space that he had left in each theme that could be filled by other themes. I like to call this thematic juxtaposition. Juxtaposition just meaning that when you place two things close to each other, it highlights their similarities and their differences. So some themes are long, more traditional melodies that have that kind of structure that we talked about before. Some of them are just two-note slurred gestures, just an interval that repeats in two-note slurs. It's very simple, but leaves space for other things to happen. Some of his melodies move early and then hold. Some of his melodies hold early and then move. Then when you line them up together and have them overlapping each other, there's space for them to cooperate or work against each other. And none of this happened by accident. He was thinking about this and creating distinct themes that were independent but that might fit together from the very beginning. He had to, so that when he combined them at the end, they didn't step all over each other and become indistinguishable, because if we, the viewer or the listener, couldn't tell the difference, there would be no point to it at all. And unfortunately, I can demonstrate none of that for you because I don't want to get Rick Beato'd by YouTube Content ID. So you're stuck listening to an example of mine where I do this as well, because I used this exact same principle in my sentimental waltzes, where I would intentionally look at what I had done in my A section and then try to do the inverse of that so that they would fit together when I wanted them to in my B section. A lot of times my A section melody would start with a held note and then move, so I would flip that. I would start the B section melody with movement that goes to a held note. If the A section is mostly minor, I might switch to a major color for the B section. I intentionally made the theme for the second movement very different to the first and third movements. That's because I knew at the end of this piece I wanted to do this thing that I stole from Ravel in his own set of waltzes, where he overlapped all of these melodies and brought them all together, little pieces of them. In the last movement, I wanted to do the same thing, so I knew that each one of them had to be distinct from each other. The theme for the first movement starts on a held note and moves up, and then comes back down. The theme for the third movement starts up here, comes down, and then goes back up. And the theme for the second movement is just very different than either of those other movements. It wouldn't matter how clever I was at the end by bringing them all together if the listener could not tell which theme was which, if they all did the same moves, the same things, had the same characteristics. I don't think I'm a particularly lazy person, but I do like to be efficient. And I like to use things I've already made. I mean, I work really hard on creating themes and melodies, so I want to find things that I could maybe take in a different direction and mine from that existing theme or melody. Find creative new ways to use it. I think one of the best examples of this is sonata allegro form from, classical repertoire, where composers in the B section, they would literally call it the development. And they would take fragments of themes they had already made and turn those fragments that they found interesting, recognizable fragments, into sequences or little motifs that could play off of each other in all kinds of creative ways. A lot of times the developments were where composers got the most creative in sonata allegro form because of how they would overlap all of this pre-existing material. Let's go back to that second movement of my own sentimental waltzes to see an example of this where I have a distinct figure at the end of the A section, this ascending three-note sequence that steps its way down. And if we listen to the B section, right away, I use that exact same figure. Why doesn't it sound too repetitive? I mean, I've just used it. Well, a lot of it has to do with the context. I change the setting around it by changing the harmony underneath. So it shares the same DNA as my A section. It is taken directly from it, but it's recast and put in a new context, and that's what makes it work. And this is what allows composers to create new sections from pre-existing material, which makes their work feel intentional and focused, cohesive, like everything is cut from the same cloth. And what less experienced composers, like myself back in the day, used to always think when I would come to a new section is, I got to do something completely different. What in the world am I going to do now? And I would just throw stuff at it. I would try to add more and more, rather than using a subtractive process of seeing what I can take out of my A section, the stuff I've already made, and develop into something new and interesting. And once I learned to listen to this, I noticed that my favorite composers did this all the time. They weren't always trying to come up with new stuff. They were looking back to the stuff they had made and mining from it. So we've talked about how listening for melody can clue you in on some of the main building blocks of music in general, can teach you structure, form, strategic repetition. And we talked about how thinking about the distinct characteristics of each of your themes can help them all fit together, and how we can take from the stuff that we've already done, these little snippets of inspiration, and develop them into something that feels new, but came from what we've already done. And the skills that you will develop if you start to listen to music with this kind of intention are the building blocks of composition itself. You start to pick up on these things and you start to be able to zoom out when you're creating your own work, when you're writing yourself. And that is the goal. We don't want to be this close to it the whole time. We want to be able to zoom out and see how the bigger picture works. We can massage the details later. By the way, I'm hosting a live workshop where I'm going to pull apart a couple of my own pieces in real time and show you how I put these concepts into practice and how to listen for these things yourself, like a composer. It's going to be free to attend, but only for the people on the wait list of my upcoming program, the Composition Clarity System. And I'm really excited about that program because that is going to show you how to take these concepts that we learn through active listening and actually write something using those concepts yourself. By the end of that program, you're going to walk away with a finished piece of music if you finish the program. I think it's the best thing that I've made so far, and I'm super, super excited about it. But to get access to the live workshop, all you have to do is sign up for that wait list in the link down below. That's going to be September 9th around 11 a.m. Eastern. So I want you to go out this week and just start listening to your favorite music, pieces that you really love. And then come back here and leave a comment with what you start to notice in relation to the things that I've talked about. How it's changed what you start to hear your favorite composers doing. I think it's fascinating that we can just put on this new lens and then start to see things that we've never seen before in the music that we already love.